This is WRUULP, Savannah, Georgia, 107.5 FM, WRUU.org. We are Savannah Soundings, community radio with global soul. You are listening to One Human Nation with your host, Sandy Batiste. This program will be talking about race and race relations in your community and nationally. Our goal is to be open, honest, and productive.
Welcome to the One Human Nation show. I'm your host, Sandy Batiste. Thanks for joining us on today's show, where we have the tough conversations about race and topics related to race, and how do we create those conversations where it's safe, honest, open, and productive. So I have created a website that you can go to get the concepts that we'll be talking about on this show and ongoing shows. It's at onehumannation.info. Again, that website address is www.onehumannation.info. Today's show is going to be focusing on a topic that we refer to as a cultural iceberg. And this concept requires you to picture an iceberg. So when you think of an iceberg and you think of the top of the iceberg or what you're looking at, that's the external. And that's what we refer to as the surface culture, the external culture. And as I talk through this concept, keep in mind that you can actually view this actual iceberg at www.onehumannation.info and click on resources. So we have the external culture when you think of an iceberg and the tip of the iceberg, but we know that's what's underneath the ice. The bottom portion, what's underneath the water, is what's really driving the iceberg. It's that huge block of ice that we don't think about because we don't see it, but we know it's there because we know how an iceberg works. Well, the cultural concept for a cultural iceberg is that what's really driving our actions and what we're doing is based on the internal culture. So before we go further into the show, I do want to state that the viewpoints expressed in the following program are not necessarily those of WRUU, its license holder, or its staff. So in talking about the cultural iceberg, keep in mind this picture that we have in mind. So external are things like food, flags, festivals, fashion, holidays, music, performances, dances, games, arts and crafts, literature, and language. So think in terms of when you see these things, when you hear a different language than the language you're comfortable speaking, which for many of us is English, Americanized English, how does that make you feel? What are the judgments that you make? External culture. And you may think, well, I really don't have a bias. And we encourage you to, venture forth and utilize the implicit association test that you can also find at the website, www.onehumannation.info. And there are several different types of tests that you can take there. It's not only race related. You can test whether you have a bias towards someone that has a disability, whether you have a bias to a different culture, the Muslim culture. Do you have a bias against someone because of their age? We're focused on this particular show in creating a one human nation, moving towards looking at everyone as a human being, as opposed to thinking of race as our first point of making an evaluation based on the color of someone's skin. And this implicit association test also has a test based on if you have a bias based on skin color, whether it's light skin or darker skin. And keep in mind, this show is all about not making judgment. So it's not our hope or intention to judge anyone, because we do want you to feel comfortable in having the conversation, and it takes practice. And the guest speaker we're going to have today coming on, she's going to talk to us a little bit about some of her experiences as it relates to culture with elders and adolescents and raising kids from her viewpoint. So I don't want to do a spoiler alert when she calls in. It'll be about 5:15 Eastern Standard Time that she'll be making a call in. But we do want you to get the concept down that we have to have a framework for having these discussions, because we realize it is very sensitive. It's very easy to get offended. It's very easy to get angry, upset. But it's an ongoing revelation that until we get to reconciliation in this country, until we go through a healing process, we really can't get towards justice. And recent events, current events, seem to validate that we are a long way from this country realizing that we've got to go through a process that's not going to be comfortable for everyone. It's a difficult conversation. It's not something that anyone looks forward to having, but it's a reality for many of us on a day-to-day basis that have to deal with a culture that is a white dominant culture. It sets the standard how everyone else kind of falls into where they are in the system, whether it's economics or whether it's a social justice system. It unfortunately in this country is based on our mutual history. And I like to tell people it's not a Black history or white history or Native American history, Asian American history. It's our history of the United States of America. So we want to keep some of the same kind of standards that we set in another initiative that involves workshops face-to-face. It's called the One Human Race Initiative. And it's a series of workshops, and it's a little easier in that kind of format to form a safe place because there's a face-to-face that's occurring. And it's 3 separate workshops, consecutive Saturdays, and people that participate in these types of workshops, they get to build community. We don't have that luxury because we're on the radio. So we're trying to give a format that if you're not comfortable being live on air, you don't have to. You can email your story to mystory@onehumannation.info. Again, that email address is mystory@onehumannation.info. So again, picture a cultural iceberg. Picture what's above the line and what's below the waterline. So we've talked about some of the above the line, food, flags. And in talking about flags, we think of course, the flags for the United States of America, but we also have to think in terms of how do you feel when you see a different flag? How do you feel when you see a Confederate flag? How do you feel when you see a particular state flag or a flag from another country? We then have the deep culture, what is below the iceberg. And these are things like communication styles and rules, like facial expressions. How do you feel if someone doesn't make eye contact? What's their body language? Are you invading their personal space? Or you're a toucher or a hugger when you greet people? Different conversational patterns and different social situations, as well as how deep culture people display emotions differently, and take in consideration what's the tone of voice. In some cultures, it's just the norm that everything is loud and robust, and the conversations can seem to be violent, but that's the culture. Deep culture, what's beneath the surface, are also things that we kind of imprint on about our notions of courtesy and manners, friendship, leadership, even cleanliness and modesty, beauty. Where do we get our concept of what's considered or who is considered beautiful? We also internally get our concepts of how we look at ourselves, how we consider time, how things are with fairness and justice, what the roles are related to age, to sex, to class, to family, and then our attitudes toward our elders is also part of our internal culture. Children, what are our attitudes and how we interact with our children, and taking care of dependents, different rules, expectations. What are our attitudes towards work or authority? Cooperation versus competition. That's an internal culture. In some cultures, it's frowned upon to be competitive. In our culture, it's trying to recognize people and say, oh, you're going to get an award for XYZ. That may not be part of their culture. They may feel very embarrassed to receive that type of display that they were better than their coworkers. Deep culture also includes our relationships with animals, how we view aging, even sin, as well as death, and our approaches to religion, courtship, marriage, raising children, decision-making, even problem-solving. So I know this is a lot of information to digest, and I encourage you to take a look at the cultural iceberg that's posted at the www.onehumannation.info website. This particular description was something that, believe it or not, found it on Facebook, came from a group called the Writers Circle, and they did a really good job, I thought, about breaking down what this iceberg looks like and how we need to start looking at our internally at how our culture, how our environment was, how that impacts how we look at different aspects of everything that governs us. And you may think, well, I really don't have a preference. I'm okay. So I'm going to give you some hopefully non-threatening situations for you to consider as we get ready for the caller to call in. So for those of you that are out driving, leaving work, you may be looking around at who's driving in the car next to you. Are you making a decision, or are you making a judgment about that person on anything, including the car that they drive? If you're stopping by the grocery store, you're making a decision when you get ready to check out. How do you choose which line that you're going to use for checkout? Is it only because of the person in front of you and what's in their shopping cart? Or are you looking at the person in front of you saying, I wonder how long it's going to take them to really check out? Is the line long? And then you're looking at who is actually working behind the cash register to say, this person is slow. And are you making that judgment off of an external factor that you're looking at? Is it based on something that you're seeing on how they're dressed? Is it based on the color of their skin, race? Is it based on some other consideration other than the line is long, and you're making a decision of how you're going to choose and navigate which line that you're going to select? So it's not necessarily to think in terms of this is a bad thing, an awful thing, or, somebody's really going to think I'm a bad person. And that really is one of the barriers to having honest and open discussions about race and our viewpoints of racism in this country, because no one wants to be judged. No one wants to feel like they're guilty of something, or that they're going to be accused of something. But we have to get beyond that point, because it continues to have a play in a lot of the day-to-day situations that we see, we read about, we hear about. It invades our sports culture, whether an athlete is standing during the national anthem, or what is it that's our trigger point? At what point what is going to take for us to have these conversations about race and racism? So our goal on the One Human Nation show is to have an open, safe, honest, and productive conversation about race. And one of the ways we do that is by taking a look at our internal culture. Take a look at what's going on inside you as opposed to what you're judging someone else on. And there's some of the factors that we look at in making those judgments. It's something as simple as someone's name. Do you make a judgment based on, is it a name that you're thinking, this person is probably of a different ethnicity? And sometimes you're correct and sometimes you may not be correct. So keep those in mind as you think about our cultural iceberg. We're going to take a short break and we'll be back with more information about cultural diversity. Okay, we're back with the One Human Nation show, and we have a guest with us to talk about her experiences with delving into cultural diversity. Soccer, are you with us?
Yes, I am.
Fabulous. Thanks for joining us. And how's it going there in the ATX?
It's going just fine here in the ATX. It's a great day in Austin, Texas.
Oh, do y'all miss me?
Yes, we do. We miss you all the time.
I just had to, I know, I just had to get that in. I am loving being back in Savannah, but I do appreciate you taking the time to give us a call, because that's really where I got involved with the whole conversation and the experiences about race, and getting involved in the One Human Race workshop series. So how did you feel when I first asked you to participate in these workshops?
Okay, so when you first asked me to get involved with the workshops, I said to myself, what? One Human Race? What are we talking about? What is she talking about? I know all this race stuff. What am I going to be doing? Talking to other people of color about race? We already know about this. What is this? That's what I thought. And I was like, Sandy is my friend, and she wouldn't ask me to do anything that's crazy. So let's do it.
Yeah. So yeah, that's how. And I totally understand, because I was kind of voluntold at my first workshop in 2012 when I was asked to attend one also. But it's been a great eye-opening experience. So I do want to get right into the topic today. We've been frameworking how to really understand different cultures and how we look at things that are beneath the surface. It's kind of obvious when everything is above the surface. We've
Correct.
been introduced to the cultural iceberg. It's easy when we're looking at someone and seeing how they're dressed, or we're seeing the flag, or we are attending an event and there's dancing and music and there are games involved. Things get a little bit more complicated when it's internal culture, when it's things underneath that we may not even be aware of. So share your thoughts on some of the topics that you're thinking about that have impacted you as it relates to some of the internal culture about elders, about raising your kids. What are some of the cultural issues that you want to share with us?
Okay. One of the things that I learned during the process, and also during my life as a person growing up in Texas and interacting with other people, is that in the African American culture and in a lot of cultures of color, the children don't have as much influence as they do in the white or the Caucasian culture. Because when we grew up as kids, we were told to be seen and not what? What did you hear?
Seen and not heard.
That's correct. Seen and not heard. So I'm a real estate broker in Austin, and one of the things that I had to come to grips with was, I'm working with clients and they have kids, and they're white or Anglo, and we're going around to look at houses, and then little Johnny gets asked a question. So, little Johnny, what do you think we should do? And little Johnny says, well, I don't like this house, Mommy. And they actually go, okay, let's go look at something else. And I'm thinking, are you joking me? Is Johnny going to give some money towards the mortgage, or what is this? How is this? I don't understand this. That was I had to learn that. That was because my kids get told when we have the house. These are the houses we're considering, and so here's a house. But their word is not the final word, and they're not interrupting the adults. They're not having input in an adult conversation. And we still, to this day, with my nieces and nephews, we will say, this is an adult conversation, and that is their cue to just walk on out, because they do not have any comment on what's occurring between the adults. That is a difference in a non-African American culture. A lot of us growing up, in the 70s and 80s, and other people,
Well,
nowadays,
let
it's
me
different.
let me ask a question. Is that though something generational? I mean, is it
I
something
think it's
because I see,
it could be generational.
yeah.
It could be generational because I'm Generation X, and so I have started seeing a lot more people ask little Johnny's opinion. And you're going, Johnny, okay, Johnny, you have a whole bunch of cred. I need to understand where you get that from, But
Right.
it could be definitely generational. But I see it a lot more I've noticed it a lot more in like African American cultures, where
Okay.
our kids are taught, and at least the way I was raised, the same way. Old school. You're over here. My kids are getting older, so we have conversations. But little Johnny is still not going to rule my life. Little Johnny's going to know where little Johnny needs to go in and out of. I can take my kids anywhere. I had friends ask me if we could trade kids.
Well,
And I'm like, what?
let me ask this question before we get kind of, because it is sometimes I think it is more generational, that kids just have more influence. I don't know what that's all about, but that seems to be the way it is. But I know you grew up in Houston, Texas, and you now live in Austin. But at what point did you have a conversation with your kids about race? I mean, what triggered that moment when you needed to have that conversation?
Gwenny who's my oldest child. She was in preschool, so she wasn't even 5 years old yet, because that's when you go to kindergarten. And she said, Mom, Miss Jennifer told me that she's white and I'm black. And she had her Crayola box. She had her box of crayons, and she said, this is black and I'm not that color. And this is white, and Miss Jennifer is not that color. Miss Jennifer is kind of like this color, kind of like a pinkish beige. I had a conversation with a 4.5-year-old about. I had to talk to her about it. I mean, it wasn't in the sense of her being discriminated against yet, but I did have a conversation with her about the different colors and the words that people use to represent our race. And I said black or African American, and we are called African American because of our African ancestry from the African diaspora. I didn't use African diaspora with the 4.5-year-old, okay? But I had to have that conversation at 4.5. And
Yeah.
then the one about the unequalness of it, I had that conversation a little bit later, like around 7.
Okay. So I know one of the issues that I'm familiar with from living in Austin was about the changes in neighborhoods. And it was a lot of it, but a lot of the disconnect was actually surrounding how people treated their animals and allowed their animals to be engaged in, going to restaurants and different things. So what's been your experience, as far as culturally for you in how you, and I know you are a pet lover. I know you do have a dog. So
Right.
what are
Yeah.
some of the differences that you've had to, adjust to or be aware of?
Several of the differences are me having to be aware that a lot of times people's pets are like their children. I grew up with dogs, but dogs were always a part of our lives, but it was a pet. It wasn't like, Spooky, who was my first dog. He wasn't my brother, and he didn't sit at our table, and he didn't eat off our plate and that sort of thing. And in Austin, it has become a really big thing for people to bring their pets to restaurants. But what we're starting to see now, which is I'm happy about, is the people with the pets will be outside on the patio, and in the inside of the restaurant, it's just the people without pets. And it's kind of evolved to that, but it had to evolve because people were starting to not go to restaurants. People like me who I'm like, okay, look, I do not need a dog at the table next to me.
Right.
I don't need
I understand.
the dog.
I totally understand. So remember, this is a One Human Nation show. We want to have a safe, honest, open, and productive conversation. And some of it is talking about the cultural differences. So you mentioned when we were talking before about situational communication. So what's kind of different? And this may be more so in Austin, or I've kind of noticed it somewhat in Savannah. But what's the difference when you encounter another person of color that's African American in Austin, or really other places? Because I still see it in different places, around Savannah, and it's just kind of expected.
So this is something that I talked about in the One Human Race workshop, and I've told my kids about it, and we joke about it, but we call it the black card, and it's the unwritten hello or the acknowledgement or the head nod. It's the I see you acknowledgement for total strangers, and for a long time, my kids used to ask me, do I know that lady? Why am I speaking to everybody? And I told them it's because we have a black card, and if you don't say hello to people, then they'll take your black card away. And they thought I was joking. I said, ask your dad. And then I asked my husband, and they asked my husband, and he said, yeah, Mom's right. Well, we all started laughing afterwards, but then I talked to them about the acknowledgement of another person. And my friend Jill, she's also been through the One Human Race. We were at Starbucks yesterday, and her back was to the door, and an African-American woman walked in that I did not know. She saw me, I saw her, and we both did the head nod. And Jill is Anglo or white, and Jill said, that's the acknowledgement. That's the I see you. I said, yeah, this actually happened. She said, I actually got to see it happen. I said, yes, you actually got to see it happen. So that's something that we do.
So let me ask you, just from, why do you think that's so important when Black people see each other, that they kind of identify that, okay, I see you, an acknowledgement that we're not invisible? Or is there something else going on with that dynamics that you think plays a part into how we interact?
Yes, I think that what it is that it's important because it's the acknowledgement of it. It's also it kind of harkens back to way back in the day when we were, not citizens.
Slaves? Are you trying to say when
That's
we
a
were
nice way
slaves
to
and we
say it.
didn't have identities and we were
Right,
stripped of
right.
our entire identities? It's kind of a way of
Exactly.
acknowledging that I see you.
Yeah,
In
I see
soccer,
you.
I do apologize. I'm looking at the time, so I
Uh-huh.
am going to, keep the door open so that you'll come back on the show and talk to us about some
Sure,
other
absolutely.
topics. But I
Okay.
do appreciate you spending your time today to give us a buzz and just share some of your insights. And
Mm-hmm.
keep doing the good work of the One
I
Human
will.
Race Initiative. And I'll talk to you later. Thank you for calling
Okay.
in.
You're welcome. Bye.
Bye. And we're back to the One Human Nation show. And that's just to give you a sense of when we encourage you to call in, that we want you to feel comfortable about sharing your stories. And there's a little framework and there's a context of sharing the story, so that not only do you feel safe, but we want you to feel that you can be honest, that it's an open discussion, that it's also productive. Because if we can't have the conversation, we can't see the changes happening. So it's time for us to take another break, and I'll be back with you in a few minutes with the One Human Nation show.
This portion of WRUU-LP Savannah Soundings programming is made possible by a grant from Sentient Bean, offering fair trade coffee, vegan and vegetarian food, and breakfast all day. Located at 13 East Park Avenue, across the street from the tennis courts at Forsyth Park. Our menu and special events listings can be found at sentientbean.com.
As a business, if you enjoy programming on WRUU-LP, please support the station with a donation. Let your customers, neighbors, and friends know that you share our vision of building a thriving community based on diverse, vibrant radio programming. As a business partner, our listeners will know you support Savannah's only broad-based community radio station. Become a tower sponsor or underwriter. To check out the levels of corporate sponsorship and to donate, go to www.wruu.org/corporate. Again, to check out the levels of corporate sponsorship and to donate, go to www.wruu.org/corporate. Thank you for listening to and supporting WRUU-LP. So welcome back to the One Human Nation show. As a reminder, you're listening to WRUULP Savannah, Georgia, 107.5 FM, WRUU.org. We are Savannah Surroundings, community radio with global soul. I'm the host of the show, and I wanted to talk to you, continue the conversation about cultural differences. And one of the ways we learn about other cultures is, of course, by traveling. And you may be thinking, well, I don't have the money, Sandy, to travel to other cultures. And one of the things that was very interesting to me about moving back to Savannah was how many festivals that there are just, in Savannah, Georgia. So I would encourage you to take a look around your community and see what festivals you can attend. For example, in Savannah, there's a Greek festival, there's a Celtic festival, there's a Fiesta Latino, there's a jazz festival that, attracts all different types of people. And of course, obviously, we have the big St. Patrick's Day event that happens. And so the question is, do you explore other cultures? Are you open to different experiences? What do you feel comfortable in your world? Because in order for us to really get to understanding different cultures, it's important that we at least expose ourselves, and hopefully in a positive way. We often talk about being open to the experience of learning, and to be open, sometimes it's difficult because we immediately judge if we see someone that's wearing a head wrap, for example. We immediately judge their culture and assume, why would that female do that to herself? Why would she, conform to that particular cultural requirement? We instantly make judgments. In order for us to move towards being one human nation, I think it's important that we realize that we are a country with different cultures. So how do we get to the point of accepting those different cultures without judging? And I know there's a school of thought that says, well, you know what? They're in the United States of America. They need to conform to us. Well, that becomes a problem when you are the dominant culture and other cultures are not easily forming and assimilating to your culture. It's a tendency for us to feel very threatened if someone speaks a different language, if someone is dressed differently, if someone wants to celebrate a different holiday, because that's all part of our internal culture. The other topic that I want to talk to you about that's very much cultural, and it's something that I was exposed to a lot in 2016 and transitioning back to Savannah, and that is our attitudes towards end of life. It's a very difficult topic, and when you're transitioning or helping someone to transition, especially when it's your parents, you're typically dealing with organizations or entities having a conversation that can be very difficult. Because if we think race is a difficult conversation, end of life, talking about death, is definitely a difficult conversation. And I think it's one, if we're going to look at different industries, that the medical profession is taking a closer look at, because it is in some ways very difficult and different for African Americans to be open and honest with a system that's typically, as far as the medical profession in many ways that has used our particular group for want of a better word, a guinea pig. So it's very difficult when we think in terms of being honest with our medical practitioners. I experience parents not wanting to be very open about whether they were in pain or what was really going on, because at the end of the day, they felt like, well, it's time, So I think it's a topic that the medical profession is taking a closer look at. And it needs to be, because in order for us to move towards being one human nation, it is having an understanding, looking at our history, looking at the treatment of different people in our country, and reconciling, acknowledging that, there were some awful, atrocious things that happen in the United States, and not admitting it doesn't make the problem go away. And there is this, ongoing theme of, well, can we just let it go? Can we all just get along? And I'm not going to go into current events on this show because we're out of time for today. So hopefully you will tune in next week, Thursdays, 5 o'clock Eastern Standard Time. And we'll be continuing the dialogue about why our past history is important to look at, to acknowledge, to accept, so we can reconcile, so that we can get to healing, so we can move towards justice, so that we can become one human nation. And I challenge you, before the next show, go to www.onehumannation.info and take the implicit association test. Go and see if there are any unconscious biases that you may not be aware of. It's not about judgment. It's being aware. It's being awake. Thank you for listening. We're going to take another short break, and we'll be back to finish up with the One Human Nation show. Welcome back to One Human Nation. I'm your host, Sandy Batiste. Thank you for listening to today's session, today's topics, as we continue to talk about our internal and external culture. And I do challenge you to go to www.onehumannation.info and just take one of the implicit association tests, so you may surprise yourself in thinking about, do you have an unconscious bias that you're not aware of, that you may think, I don't have any biases whatsoever. We all have some type of bias. It's acknowledging what our unconscious biases are, being awake so that we can make changes, so that we can move towards becoming one human nation. Thanks for tuning in. And next up is Sound Limit with Troy Stoner.